reconnaissance, and footprinting. In this nugget, we're talking about reconnaissance and footprinting, and this is part one, where we talk about active versus passive intelligence gathering, and the main point here is whether or not you're being noticed. We'll talk about how to differentiate the two there. We'll also talk about why we want to do this at all. Quite frankly, sometimes this is the more boring part of doing a hack, because you have to do a lot of research. You may have to go through a lot of stuff that doesn't really make any difference whatsoever in search of a needle in a haystack where you'll get some juicy tidbit of information that could really help you. We also talk about several reconnaissance tools and how you can use those tools to gain more information about your target. As geeks, one of the gratifying experiences we have is when we finally crack through a password or are able to compromise a website or do some kind of an elegant hack that works. Because if you face it, in hacking, most things we do are just time-consuming and they're not directly hacks, and most things we do actually will very often fail. And so when you actually finally get that moment where, you do the fist pump moment, then you can really celebrate that. Of course, since we're geeks, we don't usually have anybody to share that with. Usually we're just in mother's basement celebrating by ourselves. But anyway, it's not really related to hacking, but I want to share with you a fist pump moment that I had recently. I was photographing the Stanford visiting University of Arizona football game a couple of weeks ago, and as a professional photographer, and Sports Illustrated picked up my photograph. Now, it's just a bunch of Yahoo fans, but I did get published on Sports Illustrated. And then last week, I photographed Oregon visiting University of Arizona, and they published this photograph of Michael James breaking a record for the yards that he ran there. He can seemingly run through anything. But anyway, two photographs now on Sports Illustrated, and I was really excited about that. Well, as hackers, we always want those exciting moments, and the temptation is to kind of go directly to Metasploit or try to immediately telnet into something and see if we can take ownership or get ownership of something, or escalate privileges and all that sort of thing. Well, that's really the wrong way to do it. We don't want to do that first. In order to get to that point intelligently and efficiently, the first thing we need to do is reconnaissance and footprinting, which is the next module within the Certified Ethical Hacker exam objectives. Actually, they call it Module 2, Footprinting and Reconnaissance. I think that title is kind of backwards because footprinting is part of reconnaissance, so it really should be reconnaissance and footprinting. Anyway, splitting hairs a little bit there's a couple of different ways of doing reconnaissance, footprinting, whatever you want to call it. There's the active way and there's the passive way. Let me give ourselves an entertaining little color here. How about pink? Hot pink, because I'm feeling kind of feisty today. Anyway, passive reconnaissance means this. When we're doing our recon of maybe a corporation or a company or an individual, whatever reconnaissance we're doing should be as indistinguishable from ordinary public network traffic. In other words, even if I wasn't a hacker, I was just, Joe Public out there, and I was thinking about buying some shares of Motorola. Well, I might go to the Edgar database. I might do some research on Yahoo's investor websites. I might go to who knows whatever else, and just do some research on how they spend their money, what kind of expenses that they have, what kind of overhead they have, what they're spending on research and development, and some other things that just anybody would want to know, maybe as an investor. Well, some of that same information that investors would look for is some of the information that a hacker would be interested in as well. Things also such as corporate filings, patent applications, things of this nature. I might want to know more about the CEO and who's running the company, because after all, they have potentially billions of dollars in their hands that they could run into the ground. So I might want to find out about that either as Joe Citizen or as a certified ethical hacker, because maybe I want to find out more about the CEO so that I can social engineer either that person if I can get close enough, which usually I can't, or social engineer somebody that's close to that person and hopefully get some additional information. So in passive reconnaissance, we're going to be pretty much indistinguishable from ordinary public traffic. Now, there's an exception to this. Let me talk about that. As a certified ethical hacker, normally you want to run a pen test, and that's what our business is. That's very often what we're paid for. But when you sign the contract and everything, sometimes there are stipulations with a lot of these large companies where they'll say, okay, you can do the pen test, and we want it to be just as if you were a black hat hacker, except we want to know which IP addresses you will be hacking from, and we only allow you to hack from 11 o'clock p.m. to 4 o'clock a.m. Well, of course, those are things that you might not be able to get around, but you try to get rid of those stipulations in your agreement because that's not realistic. And certainly, if they know your IP address in advance, then they might be able to kind of cheat and put up some intrusion detection filtering that would block you out and so forth. And so, unless you can't get around those kinds of limitations, then you're going to be indistinguishable. Okay? Otherwise, they'll know when it's your IP address that goes to their website and tries to do directory browsing and things like this. There's also just a Google search. Now, we're going to talk about Google hacking here coming up towards the end, but I'm just talking about normal Google searches that anybody could do. Using something like this, or even just browsing the company's web page, their public web page, I might want to find out who the CEO is, who the CIO is. I might want to try to find some other information out. For example, on the company's web page, usually there's a careers link, especially on a lot of these larger organizations, and you can look through there to see what kind of people they're looking for. That will tell you something about the technology that they're using. They might want to find somebody in their job postings that knows all about Juniper networks, or that knows all about checkpoint firewalls, and so they'll probably hire, a CBT Nuggets trainer known as Bobby Metter, who knows all about all of that stuff. So anyway, they'll be looking for that kind of thing. Well, now I know what kind of firewalls you use. I know what kind of IDS you use. They might want to look for somebody who knows how to work with Oracle databases. Well, now I know that they're using Oracle. And as a result, when I look at Metasploit or any other kind of a vulnerability out there, I'm going to find vulnerabilities against Oracle, and I can go to various hackers' databases that list all of the vulnerabilities. I can also do things such as viewing various message boards here as well. And when I say message boards, I mean things such as the technical support sections of various websites, where people would go, where administrators would go, if they're having a real gnarly problem or having some kind of troubleshooting issues. Because very often, what they'll do is naively post information about their network or about their operating systems or about their website, whatever it is, and it could be potentially sensitive information that they're posting in search of some answers. And another example of that is Experts Exchange right here. This is one of my peeves, by the way. Anytime you have a website with a hyphen in it, why do you put the hyphen in? Can you do it just without that? But then it occurred to me, without the hyphen, this becomes Expert Sex Change. I'm sure that's not what they would want. Maybe that would be Chaz Bono's personal website or something like that. Anyway, I'm not trying to put down Experts Exchange. They're actually, I think, probably a pretty good organization. Here they are right here. You do have to subscribe to it, I think, so you have to pay a little bit of money. But there are a lot of times good answers in this, where they'll give you some solutions, and you might be interested in this if you actually do have some legit troubleshooting issues. But I have seen on there at times people post their entire config file from their routers. Well, that basically tells everything that they're blocking, everything that they're allowing, and if they are allowing ported on 80, which server it goes to, and so forth. So it could be potentially sensitive information that you can scam out of that. Anyway, just browsing any of this stuff, just looking for any of this stuff is all passive. It doesn't look any different than any other user out there on the internet, hacker or not. And normally, this is going to be the very first step that you take as you approach a hack. You don't, again, go immediately to your hacking tools. You're just kind of exploring it first. And you got to keep low key. The main thing is we want to do what we're doing without being a suicide hacker. We don't want to get caught. And you're very often much more likely to get caught in an active reconnaissance. Now, this is probably the minority of what we'll be doing. Most of what we'll be doing is passive reconnaissance, and that's going to be what we'll be discussing in most of the rest of what I'll be talking about in this nugget. However, there will come a time in an active reconnaissance where you're going to have to do a network scan. Finally, if you've gotten all your homework done up in here, you know what kind of servers they're using, you know what kind of web servers they're running, and so you might do a network scan to find out where their web servers are in the DMZ, and you might want to pick out their IP addresses, for example. Then you can also, once you've identified those, you might run a vulnerability scanner against them if you have the capability to do that. There's a number of different tools out there, but you could run that and see what kinds of patch vulnerabilities they might have, where they haven't done a certain patch that's necessary to protect against an exploit. Then you could do something like a ping sweep. Now, I'm not really recommending this one. Ping sweep is very what we call noisy and very obvious that someone is trying to scan somebody's systems. And so a lot of intrusion detection systems would immediately pick up on that and say, hey, someone's doing a ping sweep against our entire network, and then they might shut down your IP address so that you're blocked now on their network. But some vulnerability scans and penetration tests and so forth are a little bit looser than that, and they might allow that, at least temporarily, until you find out what the vulnerabilities are. There's also social engineering. This is really not quite passive and not quite active. I think it would be classified as active because you're actually getting involved, and people might see your face, know your voice. You're actually kind of penetrating a system. But at the same time, if I was just a friendly guy and I was just making friends with somebody who works in that building, that might not necessarily be a hack. That could be considered passive in that respect as well. But I think for exam purposes, they will call it social engineering active. And there's a whole section on that we'll address a little bit later on. There's also something called spear phishing. We might talk about this a little bit more later on as well. That's part of social engineering, actually. There's phishing, where people will, send an email to you usually, and in that email it says, your bank accounts have been frozen. Click here to unfreeze them and verify your identity. And in doing so, they ask for your username and password, and now they got your banking username and password. Well, that's something that might be sent out to hundreds of thousands of users through some kind of a spam broadcast of some kind. Spear phishing is much more targeted than that. What you're going to be doing is, in your passive reconnaissance up here, maybe you're finding out the administrative assistant to the CEO. Now, the CEO is probably very well protected. They may even have their own security forces. They may have a bulletproof limousine. Some of these larger companies, they actually protect their CEOs that way. So, very difficult to get close to that person. But their administrative assistant, who knows that CEO's password, who knows where all the skeletons are, buried, and there's all the skeletons in the closet or whatever, we might be able to spear phish them. Okay? Maybe we find out through Facebook what their hobbies are. Maybe we find out they're like square dancing, and they're a member of the local square dancing club, which has a website which is very easy to hack. And we've been able to find out that administrator's password that they use to get onto that square dancing website. Just so it happens that's the same password they use to log on to their systems at work. And so you see how this goes. We're able to go round and round and round and derive more information. But I've kind of moved away from spear phishing. Let me talk about that. Since we found out that they're interested in square dancing, maybe we would send them it's kind of like a phishing email that we would normally send to thousands of people, but now we're sending it to a specific person. So it's very targeted, and that's why I call it spear phishing. And in that email, it says, you've won a 1-year subscription to Square Dancing for City Folks. Square Dancing for City Folks. Click here in order to get your free membership. Well, see, that looks a lot less suspicious, because it's not like they're sending me an email that doesn't have anything to do with anything that I've done before. If I'm doing square dancing and I see that, then it's going to be much more likely that I'll actually click on it thinking that it's legitimate. And then what I could do is, when I click the link, it could do a number of things. There might be a frame in the link that actually takes me to a web page that downloads malicious code to my computer, or that asks me to sign up using a username and a password that I'm probably going to repeat from other websites I've been on and so forth. So lots of different things we can do with something like spear phishing. Now let's be a little bit more specific about reconnaissance here. Really the main thing here that we want to keep in mind is that we want to narrow down to specific targets and techniques. Now, if you're an unethical hacker, probably you're pretty open-minded to just finding any target out there. You might do some kind of a broad scanning technique through your ISP if you can get away with it, and try to find any company out there that has some kind of a weakness. Whereas a certified ethical hacker, usually we're contracted to work with a specific government agency or a specific corporation already, all right? So here, just by definition, we're a little bit different in what we might do than a lot of other hackers out there. Although certainly hacktivists and folks like that will be mad at a certain company and want to try to go after them. But regardless of which perspective you're taking, you can kind of think of this as, I guess, a pyramid if you want. Okay, so there's all kinds of targets out there. There's a broad number of targets, or a broad number of possibilities even within a company to where you could start hacking. Well, you can't just do your hacks against all of this at once. That's where we want to do our recon. We want to find out where their web servers are. Oh, we found out a range of IP addresses here, for example, where their web servers are. Then we want to find out which ones are front ends to a SQL database further in the back end, because we want to get access to that data. Okay, so now we've narrowed our scope a little bit. Now we want to find out which, if any of them, are susceptible maybe to, I don't know, SQL injection. I'll just put INJ for injection there. And this is kind of broad and all different ways you can go with this. But now we've narrowed it down a little bit further, and maybe we find out now we have the single SQL server right here that we found out has some kind of a vulnerability, or it wasn't patched properly, or it does have that vulnerability to SQL injection. So that's why we do our reconnaissance, because it's a huge waste of time to attack at this level. We have to do the recon to funnel it down to, just a few specific hosts that we really want to gain access to. And doing this kind of reconnaissance is what helps us to avoid these broad scan, Christmas tree, Nmap sweeps and so forth, script kiddie methods and things like this. This is also going to help us to identify the brands that we want to target, so we know which brand of router they're using, so that we know which version of the iOS. Maybe there's an older version that's in use that has a vulnerability that we can target. Also, we can do some Wi-Fi. By the way, all of this stuff down here you could classify as fingerprinting, where we're getting specifics about what they're using in terms of their network and or their operating systems. So, for example, with Wi-Fi, a lot of organizations now have directional antennas that are designed to only focus their Wi-Fi signal inside of their building. And even if you're standing a few feet outside of their building, you might not be able to pick up the signal anymore because of the way that directional antenna works. So their companies are doing better now at their site design for this. However, there's still methods that could be used that could pick up those signals. For example, here is a cantenna. Where'd it go? Here it is. A cantenna. You can get a real good signal booster out of this, so that even if there's just a little bit of signal leakage out of that building, you might be able to pick it up using this thing attached to your laptop. And this was actually inspired by the old Pringles can. This is the original way that it was done, through a Pringles can. Unfortunately, the way they sell this thing, there are no tasty treats on the inside of this, but at least it will give you a signal boost, and you can get quite a good range out of this. Very often this will be used in what we call ward driving, which is where you just hook that up to your laptop, you drive around a building somewhere or a neighborhood, and you pick up Wi-Fi signals. And you may be able to even do this outside of the surveillance cameras of a property so that you're undetected in that way as well. You want to identify the kinds of network equipment they have in use, intrusion detection systems. Do they use Snort? Do they use something from Cisco? What kind of routers do they use, and so forth. And it's not really in this list, but you might also be able to identify which ports they have open. Again, Nmap is a good way to do that. That can be run so that it's quiet and much more discriminating and not quite as noisy. You could use Nessus, for example, to find out which things they have open as well. You find out which operating systems they're using. This is particularly good on web servers because you want to find out, are they running Apache? Are they running IIS? And which patch level are they at? This sometimes is a little difficult to determine, but sometimes you can find out when the last time a server was rebooted. Some of the patches that are necessary have a reboot that's required, especially if it's a pretty drastic update. Well, if the last update for the serious vulnerability came out 2 weeks ago, but they haven't rebooted for 3 weeks, then you know that they don't have that level of a patch. So that's where the uptime comes in handy with that. There's also the default configuration and default password. A lot of folks, especially that are less educated with network equipment, they may just plug in a Wi-Fi in a wireless access point and just say, hey, now we have Wi-Fi and we can take our laptops all over the building and to the conference room, to our desks and everywhere. And they're very happy about that. But what they don't realize is they just left everything at the default. There's a lot of different defaults that you can work with this. For example, here's one website. Just do a simple Google search. You can find all kinds of places like this. But maybe they hooked up a Belkin device, okay, or any of these other brands. And maybe it's this particular version of the Belkin model. Well, they're using the admin. If they use all default values here, they're using an admin username with a blank password. And just all of the major manufacturers have something in here. Even Cisco, you can identify, some of the passwords for those Cisco devices as well. They may also be educated network administrators, but if you can get the timing of this just right, maybe somehow you're able to intercept an email and find out that they had a specific device, whichever one of these there is, that's coming in, in a shipment today. And maybe you can be able to sneak in during the time that they have just plugged it in, and you can find out that you're able to gain access to it. prior to the time that they're able to change these default passwords and so on. That's a little bit more of a narrow window, but this kind of thing does happen. Now, in doing your passive recon, there's several different resources you can go to. And I've got several different whiteboards on these resources, and they're not in any particular order. They're just a collection of resources you can use, such as public records. For publicly traded companies, they have to, by law, file a lot of public records. There's a number of different places you can go for that. And also, when it comes to corporate espionage, sometimes their corporate filings for things such as copyrights or patents can be very, very useful. A lot of times, a certified ethical hacker might not even be necessarily looking for information regarding to the technology they're using, their routers, their operating systems. They might be looking for intelligence of some type. Sometimes we're hired to look for that because a corporation will want to find out how easy is it to find out any of our intellectual secrets that our competitors could be going after. Well, this is one of those places they could go after. For example, if I go to my site right here, actually, let me go back a page. I went to the United States Patent and Trademark Office. For a lot of companies that are really in the frenzy of technology right now, like Apple, Microsoft, Motorola, some of those kinds of companies, they want to find out what Apple's using for their next generation of iPhone. What kind of screen resolution is it going to have and so forth? Well, normally they're going to have to file some kind of a patent or a trademark for some of those kinds of items. And so if you search against Apple, you might find something. I just did this against Nikon because I love, cameras and stuff. And I found a patent here for something that they're doing. Apparently, this looks like a sensor that they're developing, and this is actually a little bit of an older one, older abstract, but it's been published by Nikon Corporation here. So I might be able to find out something new and fancy about their next generation camera sensor. Now, a lot of these things that I'm talking about here, especially up towards the top, they take a lot of reading and research. You might have to go through a lot of meaningless stuff before you can find, kind of the golden nugget here. I guess I'll have to say golden nugget since we're talking about CBT nuggets. Anyway, one of the places you can also go is the Edgar database. This is actually part of the SEC, and let me try to find the right page here. There we go. If you go to the SEC home at sec.gov, and you can find the path here to the company search for Edgar. Here I just decided to find a local company here in the Phoenix area. This is U.S. Airways. And I'm not going to try to give away anything that's sensitive about U.S. Airways here. I'm just looking at public information here. I'm trying to cover myself here and not get too much trouble. So if I go into this, I can look for a lot of stuff. What kind of things might I find in this? Well, I might find maybe they're having some kind of financial troubles because their, Southwest Airlines is taking too many of their customers because Southwest does not charge for baggage. Let me repeat that. Southwest does not charge for baggage. Whereas I think it's $25 a bag under this company, and that would save you $50 on Southwest. Well, maybe they're losing a mass exodus of customers, and as a result, they decided to slash their IT department, because after all, it is the IT department's fault. So now you might be able to look around and find bitter, disenfranchised, disillusioned ex-IT employees from this airline. And you can go and do searches on job search sites or on places where people post their resumes. You might search against former U.S. Airways IT department employees. Maybe those same employees have been posting some negative responses about this company that could be useful to you. Anyway, I'm kind of making that stuff up. I don't know that there's any of those kinds of problems, and I've flown U.S. Airways many times and have had, reasonably satisfactory results. I don't want to get into too much trouble here. Anyway, so that's Edgar. But then you could go to the social media places that I was telling you about and find those disenfranchised employees where they just got laid off, and on their Facebook status, they talk about that, and they say what their manager's name is. And people put all kinds of stupid, foolish things on Facebook. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, why I actually seldom, if ever, put anything on Facebook. I do have an account. I very seldomly accept friend requests. It's just kind of there. I'm not really even sure why. It's probably just kind of communicate with my family sometimes. But people will just indiscriminately post the most foolish things on Facebook, and a lot of things that people don't care about. I'm eating a bag of Doritos. Well, who cares? Same thing with Twitter. You'll find a lot of the celebrities out there that have a big following. A lot of these athletes, for example, will post something about the last game or about another player, and they're just mad or something, and they'll post it out there, and they'll get themselves in a lot of trouble. It doesn't really have to do a lot with ethical hacking, but it does prove the point that people post first, think second a lot of times with these. Same goes with a lot of the online forums nowadays, where nowadays Facebook and Twitter are getting more attention than some of these forums, but they'll still post there as well, venting their feelings about how something has gone on. Well, you might be able to social engineer that employee, get a little closer to them, find out some sensitive information about how the IT department is being run, and be able to exploit that. And also, once again, you might not be able to get directly in touch with the CEO of the company that you found out from Edgar. And finding the CEO of a company is not hard. It's going to be on Edgar and a lot of the filings. And it's also going to be just probably on the own company's homepage. They'll have some kind of a welcome from the CEO or something like that. Anyway, using the airline as an example, remember here I was at the Edgar search results. Maybe I want to find out more about U.S. Airways. And again, I don't have anything against U.S. Airways. They provide a lot of really good jobs here in the Phoenix area. But if I was interested in them as a company, maybe I wanted to contact the CEO. Now, this is a website that I think it's really pretty much designed because people might be unhappy about an experience they had at a certain company, but they don't know how to get a hold of the owner of the company or the CEO, for example. Well, here at this company right here, we can find the Continental Airlines contact, what their relatives are, and so forth, even where they live. And I feel a little bit funny about that because I wouldn't want somebody posting all of that information about me particularly, but it is public information here nevertheless. It's just that you have to dig for it. It's not that we have exploited anything private. Anyway, we find out maybe where they live, and so you can even do a Google Maps of this or something like that. I went to Zillow here to find out the house that we're talking about right here. We find out how much it's worth. By the way, it's a pretty modest. In terms of the price there, $754,000. That's very modest in terms of the salary that the person makes. So that's a pretty good deal there, I guess. And so I find out where they live. Knowing where they live, you could go further places here as well, and you could go to Google Maps after you have done that, and then you can go here and let's see, search nearby. Let's try to do this. I'm just going to do this kind of live here real quick, even though it's recording for you. I'm going to do it live. So let's see. How about maybe I happen to know that they like Starbucks or something like that. Okay, everybody likes Starbucks, right? So I can find the nearest Starbucks to where they are, and then I can go in there and maybe I can social engineer there, or maybe I know that they use their laptop in that location, and then I can possibly hack into their wireless signal, or hijack a session or something like that. Again, I'm not recommending that you actually do that for any unethical purposes. I'm just saying that if you've already been contracted to do a penetration test, then that probably is within the scope of your agreement. And also, don't forget, you can go to other public things such as just the newspaper. This is our newspaper's website here in the Phoenix area. And we see here that a couple of years or so ago, their pay dropped 31%. Maybe there's something significant about that. So now they're only making, $550,000 a year. Gee, maybe they can't afford Starbucks anymore. So we know they're not going there. Maybe they're brewing Folgers at home and reusing tea bags or something like that. So all kinds of places you can go for that information. Now, getting back to the technology, you can also make use of ICON, which is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Wow. Try saying that 5 times fast. And also regional internet registries. Now, why do we want to use these two resources? Because it's not hard to find the IP address of something that's being used in the corporation. Maybe you just found their web server there, and so now you know the public-facing web server's IP address. Well, you want to know what range of hosts you should be doing your scanning against. You don't want to scan a whole Class A range, for example, that they don't even own. So you want to use these resources to find who owns that range and what range that is. You can't use this entirely because they might have a public-facing web server that uses an IP address that's just been given to them by their ISP, and the ISP may have a Class A or a B or even a C address range that they've divided up among multiple companies. So this is not all of your answer, but it's a place to start narrowing things down. Now, the specific regional internet registries are things that you probably should know about. I've created a Certified Ethical Hacker Study Guide. I'm going to save this as a PDF file when we're done with recording this whole series. And this will just have a lot of miscellaneous information useful for you. And a lot of other things I've done. I've created separate documents for everything, but I think it's going to be more efficient if I just kind of include everything in a single document here for most purposes. And I would just be very well aware of these various organizations and which areas they're responsible for over here in the geographical area. We're working with U.S. Airways, so obviously that's a North American organization. If I wanted to find out more information about their networking, what might I do? This is just a start. This is not the whole package here, but I might ping www.US Airways and get an IP address. Interesting. Okay, so now I've got an IP address to work with. Let's see if it's actually useful for me. Okay, so I'll go over here to aaron.net, and I'm going to search against that IP address. All right. Then, having searched that, let me scroll over because I can't get everything on the page. Searching that, we see that, see, this is actually not useful to me. And that's the other part of Certified Ethical Hacker Experiences is you have to find out what's not useful so you don't go down a rabbit trail somewhere. Okay, this is giving me an entire Class A range. Wow, that's gigantic. And yep, sure enough, it's a Class A range because it's a /8. Look, it's AT&T owns that. So what's going on here is that AT&T is probably their ISP or their service provider in some way, and that's just one of the addresses that they've allocated out to U.S. Airways where they're probably doing their web hosting or something like that. So that's not directly very useful to me. What other kind of a search could I do that would get me a little bit more targeted? Well, instead, I might just type in search U.S. Airways, who is, people think you have to type in a specific domain name or an IP address up here. Not necessarily. I'm just typing in U.S. Airways here. Let's see what that gets me. Okay, I got a couple here. Let me just figure out what this one is. These are all probably the same customer. They're just different divisions of the company or something like that. So I'll click there. This looks like that's right because that's our area here. So let me go down here. I'm going to go to this related networks item. I'm just going to click this. See, now I'm getting somewhere. Okay, this may or may not be relevant. I'd have to further examine this if I had a contract to penetration test this company, but I can't go much further here outside of public information. So I know that they have a range here of 67.148.16.224 up through 255. So that's a narrow range. That's probably going to be something that they have to have public facing because it's a public IP address range, obviously, and it could be VPN IP addresses, it could be web servers, it could be a lot of different things. It could be the IP addresses that they're using for their routers. We don't know that. I would have to further explore this from this point inwards. But it's a lot better information than the first information I got, which was just a whole Class A address range from AT&T. Anyway, even the Aaron.net that we just used to perform some searches on U.S. Airways, they're using Whois, and we can go directly to Whois on other locations as well. For example, you could go to NSI.com, which is Network Solutions Inc., and they may give you a slightly different perspective on some of the Whois information. Another one that I like, let me just drag this over here. Hopefully it'll fit in the window. Oh, I guess not. Try this. Another one I'd like is the whois.domaintools.com, and I did a search for U.S. Airways there. They actually gave me a little bit more information. I'm trying to fit this in here a little better. For example, it says that U.S. Airways owns 295 other domains. Well, there might be a subsidiary or something out there that I could also search against. Maybe they're not as well protected as the first company that I'm looking for. Maybe it's a small branch office or something like that that runs that domain. I could look at, let's see what else we got. The U.S. Airways is hosted on a dedicated server. This is as opposed to a web hosting service that might be hosting services for dozens or hundreds or more websites, like personal websites and stuff like that. So I know it's a dedicated server. This gives me a little bit more information down here, address, contact information, and the like. Normally, you just get some kind of a generic technical contact here, so that's not directly useful sometimes. However, it could still be. For example, I might send an email message. Actually, one time I sent an email message to a generic.com, whatever it was here, and it went to seemingly nowhere, but then it hit a spam filtering response system of some kind, and I got a response back, but it came back from that person's actual email address, not an email alias, but the actual name of the person, Jim Johnson at, company.com, and so then I found that person's actual email address because of their spam filtering software. Then as a result of that, I was able to send a spear phishing email to that person based on something that they were interested in. So when you see something that's just generic like this, don't always give up immediately. Sometimes even a bounce message can be useful, and you can get some traceback information out of the header. Another good resource that I really like here is a company called Netcraft. It's a website that you go to. Let me drag it open here real quick. Where am I going? There we go. I already ran this against usairways.com, and you just put it in the search engine and you search, and then it tells you some information about it. For example, I know, at least based on this, that they're running Microsoft IIS 6.0. So I can start to search for vulnerabilities in that product. We can see that the NetBlock owner for the IP address that they're running, as I mentioned earlier, was AT&T. We already knew that based on previous research. And we have the IP address here. That more than likely this is all clustered because we're getting various responses from the same IP addresses. You see, we can see that the last time this server was changed was the 24th of August 2011 at this IP address. And then further down here, what's another one? This one was changed the 15th of June at this IP address. So very often what this is going to mean is that because of that inconsistency, we're looking at a cluster here, but not necessarily. Also, what else can we see from this? Oh, for this one, I'm going to go to a different example. I decided to look at another organization as well, just our local university, asu.edu. Very good university here. My next-door neighbor goes to the business school down there, which is world-renowned educational organization down there. Anyway, here I found some other information out. Look at this operating system, Citrix NetScaler. I don't know a lot about Citrix NetScaler, but it has something to do with putting part of your content in the cloud or something like that. I can see that they're running Apache. I think they run some Linux down there, so that makes sense. And we can see the last time these were changed. Now, a lot of these, again, are duplicate IP addresses, but I can see that some of these haven't been changed since, the 10th of January. So I might be able to, in some cases, look at vulnerabilities that have come out since the 10th of January and try to go against this target here. But again, in a cluster, this gets to be a little bit iffy, or in a network load balancing situation as well. This might not actually be accurate, but it could be. And that's just where you have to, poke a stick at it and see what happens. Another resource you could use here would be document grinding. This actually could take place a couple of different ways. One might be physical documents, like dumpster diving. We'll talk about that again here towards the end. But the other one would just be trying to scan through their website, seeing if it allows directory browsing, trying to see if there's a directory there that has specific documents that maybe they didn't realize were publicly accessible. May have some Word documents or spreadsheets in there, for example, that might have something sensitive in them. So just document grinding. Normally you're going to use Google hacking to be able to do this. I'll talk more about Google hacking here as well later on. There's also the issue of jobs. If you go to some of these job search sites, dice.com, careers.com, some of these others, just Google for a bunch of those. Well, you'll see that a lot of the corporations will post job postings up there saying that they're looking for somebody with a specific skill set. So if they're looking for somebody that knows Sun Solaris or Oracle databases, I think I mentioned all of this a little bit earlier, then you know what kind of technologies they're using, even what versions they're using, because they might say they're looking for, Oracle, 10 dot something or another, and you know which version that they're working with. They may have somebody that they're looking for that knows how to transition large migrations of Windows XP computers to Windows 7s. How do you perform that migration? They need someone with that skill set. Well, I know that they haven't migrated off of XP yet now, which is a very easy hack, by the way, because enough time has gone by and enough exploits have come out so that if I can find their XP boxes, I'm able to get ownership of those. So, just more information that I can get. Also, this is a little bit riskier. This kind of crosses the line into social engineering as well, but maybe I've got some of those skill sets, or at least I can fake it. I know enough about Oracle, or I know enough about databases, so I can at least have a conversation about it, even if I'm not really an expert in it, and maybe I can put together a fake resume and a fake application and actually get a job interview. So I can go in there, and as part of the job interview, it's also my responsibility, even as a legit applicant to this job, to ask questions about their technology, because I need to know if I'm capable of working with it. So I can impersonate somebody who's looking for a job there and ask all kinds of questions about their technology. Now, the only other thing to be careful about there is if it does require that you fill out an actual application, a lot of those now will have fine print at the end saying that all the statements that you're making are truthful and so forth, and that may not always pan out practically speaking. You wouldn't want to put yourself into a legally questionable situation with that unless your penetration testing agreement allows for this. But otherwise, if you're obligated to be truthful, then you may have to really back off on some of these interviews or job applications that you filled out. Last one I did, I had to delete about half my resume. Okay, so also, let's take a look at the web page source. Sometimes if you just go to any web page, I don't really have anyone in mind in particular. Let me just go to the last one I was looking at, this Netcraft thing. If I just go into it anywhere and I just right-click and I choose View Source, sometimes, well, let me crack it open in a different browser over here off to the side, but sometimes as you look through this, you kind of have to grind through it a little bit. This, in a certain way, could be considered document grinding as a result. You go down through here and you might see something sensitive. You just do a search for word admin, or search for the word password, or PWD, or some of those sensitive kinds of things that you might be wanting to look for. Sometimes you can get useful information out of that as well. So anyway, that's looking at the web page source. Oh, also sometimes in those web page sources, it'll identify directories that you can't directly click on. There's no link for it in a browser, but if you just type it into the browser, it may take you to a directory that's not otherwise meant to be viewed. So that's kind of useful for that as well. Also, you might want to mirror the sites. You don't want to directly attack the website itself looking for the vulnerabilities. It might raise some suspicious traffic patterns. So what you might want to consider instead is using utilities such as htttrack, or wget, or samspade, and you can also use archive.org, although this does not do anything to actually download the web page to your site, to your location. I'll show you what I mean. Let me just start here with htttrack. Crack this open, and here it is. This is htttrack website copier, and I've got to protect some sensitive information here. So you can see the title bar down there. I've looked for usairways.com. I'm going to bring this back up here now. And what you do is you just enter that in, and you go through a wizard, next, finish. You can specify how many links deep to go. And basically, I just copy their website down to my local computer. Now, not everything will copy. For example, some of that's kind of dynamic information, like if you wanted to search for flights to Las Vegas. Well, that uses some kind of an application that I'm not going to really be able to download directly and search against. So you can't get all of it, but you can get quite a lot of it. So once I've downloaded it to my own local file system at a location of my choosing, I can browse that mirrored website. It's cracking it open in Internet Explorer right here. Here's the application I was telling you about earlier. I can't actually use this. This is actually locally on my computer. I don't have access to all that data. But you could use anything else here that you wanted to. If you wanted to perform some other kind of a hack against it, it might be useful. And then wget is another utility that does a similar thing. There's samspade. Let me go back to this. This is samspade right here. I thought about not pointing this tool out because I'm not quite sure it'll be on the exam anymore. It used to be on the older exams, I think, but it's kind of an older tool. It hasn't been updated for a long time. The website that this originated from is not even available anymore, but it's still a very useful tool, and it's not really deprecated because all this stuff still works. So you can see here, for example, for usairways.com, I went to whois.geektools.com, but you can use a lot of other resources to look for all of that information. Okay, so I searched again for US Airways. It gives me the whois information. A lot of this is the same stuff we've seen before, but that's all right. Then what I can do is also I can ping that site, just to kind of get some information out of it. Let me stop that real quick. I think I can stop it. There we go. And then we can also get some DNS information out of it. Okay, so we can find out what mail servers are handling US Airways, and we get some information here that might be useful to us. We find the canonical name and the actual IP addresses again. We've already seen those. Then we can do, again, more whois information if we want to. Again, that's a lot of similarities to what we've already seen there, so I won't take too much time on that. The IP block, this is kind of interesting. It didn't work with this particular one, but it will sometimes go down through the whole hierarchy of the IP addresses for it and try to find more information about the owner there. You can also use the domain internet groper, which finds out more information about the name resolution and who authoritatively answers for US Airways and so forth. So there's a lot of different things there. You can also do a trace. This is similar to it's a trace route is what it actually is. And what I like about this is it actually even gives you a graph over the side of how long it takes to get through certain points here. Normally, the place that it will stop will be either the firewall or intrusion detection system or something like that. And that's where we can then start to direct our attacks, for example, to see if there's any way we can penetrate that location. Additional resources that we have relating to footprinting here will be traceroute. Now, in Microsoft language, that would be tracert. That's how you spell it in Microsoft land. Although in almost any other operating system, you'll spell it out actually traceroute. So by way of example, I went ahead and ran this because it can take a few seconds to get going. I didn't want you to stare at the screen too long. But I just decided to traceroute to www.cvtnuggets. So we can see here that it's going to CVT nuggets, and if I go down here, we can see that it's going to out through my router, and then it's going to, I'm pretty sure that's my ISP. This is my ISP at cox.net here. Pretty sure these IP addresses here all belong to my ISP, but I'm not completely sure. I'd have to check out. And then we go down to this, but then we just start timing out. Now, what is traceroute? This is going to send out an echo packet. It's going to send out an echo request, actually, with a time to live, and it decrements as it goes down through each one of these hops. Each one of these hops will usually be a router or network device of some kind. And if we have something that request times out, either an operating system that's in there or a network device of some kind is designed to reject the echo requests or not respond to any echo requests. So especially in the Microsoft traceroute, you'll very often get requests timed out, and you might not get anything useful down towards the end here. Now, with the Linux versions of this, you can run traceroute here, and it's going to be the same, except that with the Linux version, you have to run it as a super user. So I did a sudo traceroute, and you spell the whole thing out. And with this one, it also will do echo requests unless you specify --T for TCP. And now with this, I'm using TCP packets to run the traceroute. And as we go on down through here, you can see that we're getting a lot more hops in here that we're able to identify that we're not able to identify before. And as we get close to the end, I found something else. Where'd it go? I thought that was down in here somewhere. Oh yeah, as we get down close to the end here of traceroute with the T, we see that it's actually running this on Amazon's web server, and so we're able to actually get all the way to the end. So, and I did not realize that. We just recently started to make a move to Amazon, and I did not realize we had already done that. So anyway, we've got this host right there is our actual server apparently. So you can also do this using a traceroute with a capital U for UDP. This gives us a lot more of the intermediate hops as we go along. However, it'll also kind of bomb out here towards the end. So they each have different purposes, each have different functionality. I usually, if I'm really trying to find some answers, I'll usually run all three of those, the Microsoft and or both of these that we use within Linux, the traceroute, to get my hops and identify the hosts in between. Now, before I go on, I think that most of what I've shown you is exam-worthy in this entire nugget. I would definitely be very well aware of everything I'm showing you here in particular, though, on this whole whiteboard. As we move on to DNS, for example. With DNS, there's a specific tool that you can use. It's very useful for both troubleshooting as well as footprinting a network. That would be the NS lookup tool. What you can do is to just type NS lookup and press enter to go to a command NS lookup command prompt, and then you can type in the host that you're trying to look up. So what this will do is it'll query your DNS servers to try to get you an answer. So if I was looking up let's go back to usairways.com, then it's telling me that the non-authoritative answer. What does it mean by non-authoritative? That means it got it from this server right here. This is my own DNS server that I have in my own company here, and it does not actually hold the zone for US Airways. This DNS server had to go ask some other DNS server out on the internet for the correct answer. So it came back as a non-authoritative answer because I don't actually have that zone, obviously. But it resolved www.usairways, and it resolved it to these two IP addresses. Okay, and we kind of already knew that as well from previous research that we'd done, but we can get additional information out of this as well. Maybe I wanted to find the set type equals, and by the way, you can use set type equals or set query equals. They both work the same. And maybe I wanted to find out the actual name servers that are authoritative for usairways.com. Then I would again go www.usairways.com, and now it's telling me the primary name server here, whatever that is. You can see it's AT&T again. We know that AT&T seems to be hosting the website or performing some kind of services for US Airways. And we also get some other information out of this. The serial number. Every time you change the zone for this zone right here, US Airways or whatever your zone is, it'll increment. That actually looks interesting to me because it's a very low serial number. Normally when you increment your serial numbers, especially for larger corporations, that can be in the hundreds or in the thousands. Because of the various changes, as well as the fact that when it increments, it doesn't always increment by 1, depending on the operating system. So this might not be 68 total changes, it might actually be a few dozen, for example. There's also a refresh every 3 hours, a retry interval of every hour, an expiration of 7 days, and a default TTL of 86,400, which equivocates to 1 day. This is in seconds, so that's 1 day. Now, this is the one I really want to point out, though. The reason why this is important, and this may come up again later on in our series here, is that you can poison the cache, the DNS cache of some DNS servers. So that if my DNS server up here, for example, dc1.accusource.local, which is what's used to resolve DNS names within my own local network here, if I could sneak in there somehow and put a fake record to www.usairways.com to redirect people to my own IP address that is a fake website that collects information from people, for example, then I would put in something with a default TTL here that might not only be 1 day, might not only match their record, but I could do it a couple of different ways. Number one, if I wanted to only temporarily redirect people to my site and get in and out, collect some information, and then go back unnoticed, I might make it a very short TTL, because I don't want them to have that same TTL for a whole day and then potentially keep going to that location, even after I've maybe pulled it offline, and that would start to raise suspicion. So the other thing I might do is if I'm on a long-term hack here, or I want to long-term collect information, then I might make this TTL extremely long so that it will be poisoning the cache, and it will just kind of park there for a very, very long period of time. Some of the things I could do here, let's try set. I'll just use type this time, just for sake of variety. Again, they both work the same. Maybe looking for their mail servers, so set type MX. And then at this time I would just use US Airways because because this is a web server here. So I'm just looking for usairways.com for all of that domain's mail servers, and I get some answers back here. Okay, so this is where it's going to be useful for me, because if I'm trying to exploit the web servers here, or excuse me, these mail servers, then I might do some other probing here to try to find out what operating system they're running, and therefore I can find what exploits might work against that operating system and what kind of a mail system that they're using potentially. One thing I could do is I could send an email message to US Airways that I know won't work, which is some random characters at usairways.com. It's likely to bounce back to me, and then when it comes back in the header information, I can look up information about what kind of a mail system it was sending back from. And then besides setting the type or query, you can use either one, would be zone transfers. Now, there were some older DNS servers that if you would query that DNS server and say, hey, I want all of your zone records, then it would just transfer indiscriminately to whoever asked for them. And that kind of used to be the nature of the open internet. Well, nowadays, that's not a good security idea, because I could give away the names of all of my servers, all of my clients, and make things just a little bit easier for a hacker. In fact, the original version of Windows Server 2003 had that problem. Let me show you what I mean. If I do a NS lookup, and then I do an LSD against a zone that I have over on a Windows Server 2003 computer, a server that's running Active Directory and DNS, but it's not the patched version, it's not R2 or anything, it's just like out of the box. Notice that I can pull all of that zone over to my computer, and I could put that out to a text file, or something like that, and I could look at all of those records, and that, of course, is a bad idea in terms of security. So we don't normally want to allow those zone transfers. In a Windows system, by default, in current Windows, such as Windows Server 2003 R2 and Windows Server 2008 and beyond, that's no longer allowed by default, but out of the box it was allowed on the original 2003. And then there's this hinfo item here, which is actually very similar to some of the information that you would get from a whois query, only you can run this from a command line locally or against any DNS server that you can contact. So here I'm in NS lookup again. I set the type equals to hinfo, and I typed in the name of the domain I'm trying to run hinfo against. And then it will tell me the name of the server that resolved it, but then moreover, it tells me the primary name server, and all this other information that we saw before, such as the default TTL. For Active Directory domains in zones and domains, this is your default TTL is 3600 seconds, which of course is 1 hour. Whereas some of the more commercial sites, Yahoo.com or whatever, they probably have TTLs on theirs that are a full day. There's also a robots.txt file, which is something that's both practical and potentially a target for hacking methods. Now, let me show you about that one here as well. Let me get to my little browser here. In my browser, what you can do is just go to a website. You can see here I've gone to smugmug.com. This is a really good site for sharing photos for both professionals and amateurs, and they even have online commerce and things like that for professionals that makes things real easy. Anyway, what I could do with this is I could go in this and say, you know, I can kind of click my way around and I could try to find all the links. I might even be able to use some of those tools that I was showing you earlier, like HTTP Track, to download this to my own computer and then analyze the pages and things. However, there may be something that's more confidential or that they don't want to make plainly visible to us that they want to hide. And they also want to hide from spiders. What do I mean by spiders? Well, we don't get too many spiders here in Arizona. We get scorpions. We get a lot of scorpions. We've had about 2 or 3 a week in my house this past summer. But when it comes to spiders, this is simply the mechanism that search engines use to scour a website to find all of the searchable data on it. And what we want to do with, if I own SmugMug or whatever company it is, I might want to say, hey, these particular directories, first of all, they might not be useful to the public anyway, or they might just be for us. And they may also have something that's a little bit more sensitive that I don't want to have crawled by a spider. So I might just find out what that is. Most websites, if you type in the domain, like www.smugmug.com in this case, followed by robots.txt, then it will tell you here directories that they do not want these. Like you see here, this ad bot from Google, it doesn't want them to spider all of these various locations. Now, what does that mean to us? Number one, some of these might just be meaningless to us regardless, but it could also be that some of these are security sensitive. Like that looks a little security sensitive to me. So now I might want to try to see if I can get directory browsing, and I can't on this site. They run it pretty well, and it's may not be impossible to hack, but it's really a very well done website, and I think they got pretty good security. Anyway, I could try to type that into my browser and see if I can get into that directory. That would only be possible, more than likely, if they've enabled directory browsing, which is usually a bad security idea. The other thing to think about with robots is that a lot of organizations will put fake robots.txt, or some of these might be true, some of these might be false, just to throw people off the trail, so to speak. There's another thing you can do, and that is to fingerprint the operating system using Telnet. This is actually, I better put this in here, better known as banner grabbing. I'll just put banner grab, period, for an abbreviation. And the reason why this works is because most public servers of some kind, such as web servers, they're supposed to advertise what operating system or what HTTP version they're running because they need to be compatible with various browsers. So here, for an example, you can see in my Linux machine, I've already run this. I ran Telnet against 10.10.10.5 on port 80 because it's running a web service over there, and so I connected to it. And then what you do is this is something you physically type in. This just didn't appear automatically. Type head/http/1.0, and then this is important to remember. Press return or enter twice. Okay, twice. Once you've done that, then it doesn't matter if you get bad requests or whatever that is. What I'm looking for is it's telling me I'm running a Microsoft server. That's something that's important for me to know. And because of this banner grab, I'm now able to proceed with any potential hacks against this version of the Microsoft OS. In this nugget, we talked about reconnaissance and footprinting. By the way, when I say reconnaissance, they generally also refer to that as intelligence gathering. That's why I have that here. Active versus passive intelligence gathering is where, with active intelligence gathering, it could be traced back to us, especially if you're doing something that's noisy, such as certain types of scans. We'll again talk about scans more in detail in a future nugget. We also talked about a passive intelligence gathering. And remember, this is where you're just doing certain things that anybody on the internet public might also be doing. Searches for public records, browsing the home page, things like this. Also, we took a look at the purpose for this intelligence gathering, and that is that you want to narrow down the scope from a broad scope down to as narrow a scope as possible so you can find vulnerable hosts, vulnerable operating systems, and maybe something that's not patched, things like this. We also looked at several of the reconnaissance tools, just such as DNS tools, for example, like NSLookup, or we also looked at the web tool, HTT Track, where you can use it to download web pages and analyze them offline, so that, again, you're being more closely to passive intelligence as opposed to active. Looking at things like robots.txt and a host of other tools that we discussed. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.